And I tell them all the time that if they want to learn to speak English, they have to speak English. They can't expect to learn to speak just by listening or reading.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fluency Project, the podcast where language learners unlock their potential. We are on a mission to empower language learners by sharing practical tools, new ways of thinking, and inspiring stories so you can break through barriers and thrive in your language journey. My name is David Herrera. I'm your host, and in every episode, I will sit down with polyglots, educators, and everyday learners who have cracked the code. Together, we are going to explore the habits, strategies, and aha moments that make fluency achievable for you. Today's episode is brought to you by thefluencyproject.com. If you are in a journey to learn Spanish, English, or French, you are in luck, because we are opening our calendar for free assessments on your level on these languages and helping you to craft the best way to learn. Follow the link in the show notes and you will be able to schedule your 100% free language assessment spot. I would recommend to do it as soon as you can because we have limited spots and we just open those once a week. With that said, let's dive into today's conversation. Okay, I'm here with Andie Anderson, who's a professor of Spanish in the University of Denver. Andie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. So, I know you have taught language learners for 5 years now. What's the most surprising thing you've learned about how adults acquire languages?
That's a great question. I've been teaching Spanish, like you said, for about 5 years now. And before that, I had to learn it myself. And I think something that surprised me a lot as a learner, is how many mistakes I had to make in order to really become comfortable speaking the language. And I think that's something that a lot of language learners don't want to accept and find surprising themselves. I think as adults, especially, we want to do things well the first time. And so, as an instructor, it's important for me to help my students recognize that they're going to make mistakes and that even if they have a lot of experience with the language already, they're still going to make a lot of mistakes. And I think that it's hard for students to accept that, but when they do accept that part of the process is saying things incorrectly on the way to learning how to say it correctly, once they accept that, they're able to become a much more effective language learner.
That's great. And that is an amazing and an important part of it. So for you, what what is the beauty of making mistakes? What is the hidden gem that you can find by making mistakes?
I think as we accept the fact that we're going to make mistakes, it kind of forces us to not take ourselves as seriously as learners and as speakers of the language, and maybe let go of some of that perfectionism. I'm definitely a perfectionist myself, and
Mm.
I've been speaking Spanish for over 10 years now, and I still make mistakes all the time. And I think it has forced me as a learner to have my focus be on communication and finding ways to communicate effectively. And that's what I try to teach my students as well. I tell them all the time that people will understand them much better if they say things wrong sometimes, but speak with confidence, focusing on trying to communicate and speak clearly and speak with a strong voice instead of kind of a weak or mumbly voice, that people will understand them better if they speak loudly and clearly with some mistakes than if they spend all of their time trying to conjugate every verb perfectly and kind of whisper their way through the conversations, trying to say everything right the first time. If we focus on communication and on speaking with confidence, people will understand us even if we don't know how to say everything we're trying to say.
Yeah, and that is, I feel that making mistakes is the one of the most important things, and giving you permission to make those mistakes. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's very interesting that you mentioned that you're giving that, I will say, freedom to your students to make those mistakes. How do you ensure that that part of I mean the communication part of your approach is is well established in the classroom?
Great question. I think that's something that I try really hard to do, but I'm definitely not perfect at. Um, I try to talk to students frequently throughout the class about communication strategies. And that includes sharing different things that they can say to ask for clarification. So, I teach them how to ask for clarification, how to say, how do you say, how to ask someone to repeat themselves, how to ask someone to slow down. And I don't just teach that one time. Several times throughout each course, I include that in my PowerPoints and I'll include it with specific examples. So, for example, maybe one unit might be focused on food, and I'll give examples of how students could use those clarification requests with different foods. So, saying, for example, how do you say apple in Spanish? And then the reverse, um, like, ¿cómo se dice manzana en inglés, right? So asking both directions, both learning what the word means in English, maybe if they don't know the definition of the word, and then also learning how to say a word in Spanish, and then also asking for examples, like what is an example of fruta, of a fruit in Spanish? Oh, you might say apple. So just teaching them and then teaching them those exact same strategies when we're on the unit about clothing or when we're on the unit about travel, so that they know how to apply those phrases in all of these different settings. And then, in addition to helping them with those phrases, we also just do so many conversation-based activities. And I give them opportunities to reflect on how those activities went, how they felt, what they felt was missing in their conversations, what they want to be able to say for future conversations, just really trying to keep the focus more on communication, how they're feeling in their communication, than on, did you conjugate every verb perfectly in that conversation? Can you speak perfectly in the preterite? Do you think that you can use the imperfect right every time? Those aren't the questions I'm asking. I'm asking, how did you feel in the conversation? Could you communicate well? Did you understand your partner? Do you feel like they understood you? And
Yeah.
I think that's just an approach that helps them recognize that my goal for them is to communicate, not for them to speak perfectly.
That is an amazing approach, and I really like the way that you pretty much are teaching them how to keep learning in the process. It is not just about like the one time class that you receive, but the whole process of keep asking, keep learning, and keep improving in that language. So that's a great approach, and thank you for sharing that insight. So, okay, Andy, I know that you work with, refugees and immigrants who are often more willing to make mistakes than, typical adult learners. Why do you think that is, and what can others learn from their mindset?
I think for people who are learning English, I teach a free English class a couple times a month. For people who are learning English in the United States, it's a necessity. It's not to check off a box as part of their degree requirements. It's not even based on interest, it's based on necessity. And so these people who are trying to learn English as immigrants or as refugees need to be able to use it for their work and for their lives. And I do think that they're still scared of making mistakes like anyone, but I think they have to learn how to move past that fear and just practice speaking. And I tell them all the time that if they want to learn to speak English, they have to speak English. They can't expect to learn to speak just by listening or reading or even writing. If they want to be able to speak it, they need to practice saying the words, moving their mouths in that way. A big challenge for adult learners is accent and being able to pronounce words correctly, which is hard, but that goes back to what I said earlier about speaking with confidence. You can have a terrible accent, but if you speak confidently, people are going to understand you better than if you have a perfect accent, but are kind of wishy-washy in the way that you're speaking, right?
Hmm.
With confidence. And also, I try to help these adult learners who are learning English to know that they have every right to speak this language. Like, I think sometimes they can feel like they don't belong in an English speaking world because a lot of them are older, some of them are grandparents, and they've
Wow.
got their whole lives not speaking English. And so it's hard for them to feel like they can really be a part of the English speaking world. And I try to help boost their confidence and help them know that they won't be stuck in this place where they are only making mistakes forever. And as they practice and as they use the language and as they speak with more confidence, people will understand them better. So I think what we can all learn from people who are learning language out of necessity is that you do just have to make the mistakes and you do just have to speak. When it's not an option to speak or not, people speak and then they learn.
Yeah.
And so I think for my students who are young adults at the university level, helping them recognize that speaking in my class isn't an option. They don't get to choose if they want to speak or not. If they chose to take the class, they have to do it. And that they should see it as a necessary part of communication and not just something that they need to do to jump through the hoop. And I
Yeah.
also think, as part of that process, both for the people learning English and my students learning Spanish, I think something I try to do is just encourage them and boost their confidence in any way that I can. I think positive reinforcement is really important for people who are learning a language. And so telling them what they're doing well and also recognizing, helping them recognize, oh, it's okay that you didn't say that perfectly. I know you can do it better next time.
That is an important part of language learning. And I really like that you mentioned the necessity. Some people really need to speak in the language, and that is the motivation. So I feel that whatever the motivation is, it can be just for fun, just because you want to talk to people, or just because you want to travel to the country who that speak that language. Um, the motivation is key in order to learn a language. If you just do it because you're forced to do it, that is not going to have the same impact because you're not going to enjoy it. And I think that is one thing that is important. You mentioned a couple of things there, and I just want to ask you if you remember, like from the top of your head, if you remember any success case of any like immigrant or any young adult in your class that was an exceptional example of keep trying and keep learning and keep doing it.
Yeah, I think I have examples from both. I've been teaching the English class for about a year and a half, and there are a couple of students that have come back over and over. I'm not the only teacher. The class is taught 4 days a month, every Wednesday, and I teach 2 of the Wednesdays of the month. So there are other instructors as well. But there are students who have come back really consistently, and it's been really amazing to see how their confidence has grown over time and how these people who came into the class feeling really overwhelmed by learning English and feeling out of place now are leaders in the class and now can
Hmm.
help the other students. And I've encouraged them to move up to the next level of the class. But since this is a free class and they're not paying for it,
Yeah.
and I'm not getting paid for it. There's not really any way for me to force them to move up to the next level. So many of the students have taken the class 2 or 3 times, and I always encourage them that they could move up, but I think they're a
Yeah.
little nervous about that. They like to reinforce the same concepts. But it has been really amazing to see. There's one specific couple that comes together and they help each other and they have lots of notes and they've moved beyond just the most basic concepts to asking deeper questions and trying to understand things that aren't even in the lessons that they're noticing as they're watching TV in English or as they're hearing English at work. And they're getting to a point now in their language learning where they're really starting to notice what they're doing wrong and what they don't know. And I
Mhm.
think that's really cool. And it's been amazing to see how that's happened organically for them in that class that just happens once a week. For
That's
my
amazing.
students, Yeah, it's been really cool. For my students at the university level, I think some of the most amazing experiences I've had, or the most encouraging experiences I've had as an instructor, have been when students have come into my class and been really unsure of themselves and not very willing to interact with other students, not very willing to participate in the activities. And I've been able to see some of these students really blossom into really effective language learners when they have decided to focus on communication and focus on being really active participants in class and completing all of these activities where they have conversations and where they write. And I've had a few students over the years who have come into my class ready to just check this class they didn't want to take off of their list and who have shared with me at the end of the course that they didn't necessarily want to be in the class, but they had an enjoyable experience and they felt like they learned and they felt that they had success and they are deciding to take another class. I've
Wow.
had several students tell me at the end of the course that they've decided to add Spanish as a minor. And that's just really rewarding as an instructor because the classes that I teach are the freshman level courses. I don't teach classes to Spanish majors or Spanish minors. I teach the required entry level course
Okay.
that any student at the university has to take in order to move on with their degree. They can choose to take whatever language they want that's offered, but if they choose to take Spanish, that's the level that I teach. And so the students that are taking my classes are not students who really want to take Spanish and are hoping to get a major or minor. They're mostly students who took Spanish in high school and didn't love it and uh, weren't able to place into a higher course, or occasionally they're students who've never taken Spanish at all. That's more rare. But
Mm.
so many of my students have shared that they took Spanish in high school and didn't love it,
Yeah.
and that they're not necessarily excited about being in the class. I have them fill out a survey at the beginning, and they're nice, but they often say, I'm taking this to fulfill the requirement.
Yeah.
It's really amazing to see several of those students each term decide to do more with Spanish. Even if they aren't able to continue and take more classes, I still have students who tell me, I'm not able to take Spanish next quarter, but I'm hoping to take it the following quarter. Or I've decided to do a study abroad in a Spanish-speaking country,
Wow.
or I'm going to use Spanish with my coworkers at work. It's really cool to see them feel empowered. And I do think my favorite is when they tell me they've added it as a minor, which happens once or twice a year and is always really exciting because I know from my own experience how much learning a language can change your life if you continue with it. And so just seeing them make that decision and knowing that it's going to be life-changing for them is something that's really cool and really rewarding.
That's a great credential as a professor, as a teacher of a language when someone just decides to continue that path, even if it was not um, their um, the first option to learn a language.
Yeah.
So that's a great credential as a professor, but also talk really, really well about these students who wants to continue that path of learning this lovely Spanish language, which is the one I love.
Me too.
Yeah, great. So, well, Andy, I know that you prioritize communication over perfect grammar, because I also think that that is one of the most important things. You don't need you mentioned it before. People usually don't ask like, you say that tense wrong or anything like that. But it's better to learn how to communicate your ideas to people.
Mhm.
What is one imperfect but effective exercise that you use to build confidence fast in terms of communication?
I like to have students practice talking to a lot of other students. And there's an activity that I have my students do that I get really interesting feedback about, which I'll share in a minute. This is every class that I teach, I start with a warm-up activity to try to help the students relax a little bit and get ready to use the language. The classes that I teach are taught almost entirely in Spanish. I do use English to give instructions for certain activities that are sometimes confusing and also, to share announcements. But in general, I try to use only Spanish for the majority of the class time. And so I use these warm-up activities to help students kind of dip their toes in and get ready to use Spanish for this whole 50-minute period. One of the warm-up activities that I really like to use is I print out a whole bunch of questions and I give a question to each student, and then I have them read it and make sure they understand it. And then we take about 5 minutes and they take their paper and they go find another student in the class and they ask them the question on their paper, and that student responds, and then the other student does the same, and then they trade papers and they go find someone else to talk to. And this is a really simple activity that forces them to get up and move around and get their blood flowing a little bit and to talk to a variety of different people, not the people who they sit next to, but people throughout the class. And I also use this as an opportunity to highlight the grammar that we're focusing on. So if we're learning the imperfect, all of the questions will be in the imperfect, and they'll be talking about what they used to do as a kid, what they did every weekend in high school, what they always did in the summers, things like that. And then after they have those conversations, those little mini conversations, we come back together. I ask if they have any questions. We talk a little bit more about the grammar, and then we kind of jump into the heavier activities that are more complicated using that same grammar. And I think that it's a really effective activity because these conversations are really brief, but it's forcing students to use the grammar in these kind of mini conversations where they aren't filling up their time with practicing introductions, which they do a lot,
Hmm.
saying like, "Oh, hi, what's your name? This is my name. Where are you from? This is where I'm from." Students often will use that kind of filler conversation when we're doing conversation-based activities, but
Yeah.
this got away from them. And what's interesting about it is I have so many students who tell me in their exit survey at the end of the quarter that they don't like that activity, but they think it's the most effective activity that we do. And I think it's really funny
Yeah,
because
because
they'll say, this activity was really challenging for me socially because I don't love talking to a lot of different people,
yeah.
but I think it really helped me with the grammar and with the conversations. And I also have a lot of students that say that they loved the activity and thought it was effective. But it's funny to me that every quarter I have multiple students say, I thought this activity was very effective, even though I didn't really enjoy it.
Yeah.
I think it's important for us as instructors to make sure that we're scaffolding our lessons beyond just thinking about what's the lesson end goal, what's the big final thing we're going to do, and what are we going to do to get to that. That's obviously really important scaffolding, but I also think it's important to scaffold our lessons with smaller activities along the way, where it's a quick review or a quick opportunity to speak or a quick opportunity to write, because I think that those mini activities help students practice their communicative strategies, and those activities help them boost and build their confidence in their ability to communicate in those little mini conversations. And the more mini conversations they effectively have, the better their more complex conversations are going to be.
Yeah, they're improving all the time. They're trying the kind of the same context, but in different situations, with different people, different accents, and all that. At the end of the day, is giving more opportunities to learn new words or new ways to say a different word. Yeah, that's a great approach, and that is a great activity. Probably that I will be one of those saying that I like the activity, but I didn't like, the interaction with people because, science socially awkward. But but yeah, it's kind of interesting how people in those situations can speak really well and can communicate better ideas than like in a regular class, just sitting there and repeating what is in the text or whatever is the case. So
Yeah.
yeah, thank you for sharing that. So you use no, let me rephrase that question. Actually, Spanish is one of those languages that are similar in a lot of different countries, but are really different in a lot of different countries and depending on the culture.
Mhm.
Do you have any way to, bridge that gap in those, words that can be good in one country, but in the other one is not really good? How do you manage that? All the different kinds of Spanish that exist, and how do you teach that in your class?
That's a great question. So I think as a university language instructor, I am in some ways limited by the textbook because the language of the textbook, certain textbooks use Spanish from Spain.
Hmm.
Other textbooks use Spanish mostly from Mexico. A few use Spanish mostly from Colombia, but I think Mexico and Spain generally are the most common dialects
Yeah.
that are used. And so in some ways you're limited by that because there are vocabulary lists and different things that the students are reading that are going to use the vocabulary from a specific place. So I try to make sure that I'm reviewing the vocabulary that my students are learning because I've had several experiences where we're talking about something and I use a word that I think is so obvious. Of course, they would know the word. And my students end up not knowing the word because the book used a different word for
Hmm.
concept, right? So I, as an instructor, I have to make sure that I'm looking at the vocab and actually seeing what words they're being taught. But I also try to talk to students about dialects and about differences, regional differences. There's huge differences between Spanish in Latin America versus Spain. There's a lot of different approaches to Spanish. And I just try to talk to my students throughout the quarter or throughout the term about the different regional varieties of the language. And I share some examples of words that might be different in different countries. And then I also encourage them to think about the countries that they're most interested in visiting and to try when they're looking up words. There's lots of different online dictionaries.
Hmm.
Most of the online dictionaries will tell you if the word is used only regionally instead of across the board. So, for example, SpanishDictionary.com, if you look up a word, it will tell you if it's used in Spain or if it's used in Argentina or in Mexico.
Hmm.
And so I encourage students when they're looking up words to look at all of the different words and to think about where are you most likely to use Spanish and which word would you like to use. I haven't gotten very far into words that are um, considered rude or even swear words in certain countries and aren't in others, mostly because I think that at the 1000 level, that's a little advanced for students to be thinking about. But I do tell them that those exist. I just don't necessarily go into watch out for this word and this word and this word
Mm,
because
yeah, makes
most of
sense.
those words students wouldn't know anyways. But I do talk about things like how um, pastel is going to be cake in some countries, and torta is going to be cake in some countries. And depending on the country, someone might think they're going to get a cake and be handed a sandwich and be confused about that.
Yep.
Talk about that a little bit. And I always connect it to English and say, there's certain terms in the United States that are different depending on the region, even as simple as soda versus pop versus soda pop versus whatever other word.
Hmm.
So I just want them to be aware of it and to know that it exists in every language. But I let the upper level instructors teach those more specific terms that might be considered rude because honestly, I feel like students would end up getting it wrong and say the wrong thing, and
Yeah,
they're not quite to that level yet.
I see. Yeah, that is important as well. I mean, in the past, I tried to, teach Spanish to a couple of friends, not like a, a professional setting. I was just trying to teach a couple of words, and it was interesting to start, getting those questions like, wait, but in Argentina they say this is not the same thing. And for me, it's really interesting because Spanish is very rich. There's a lot of culture around Spanish in general, but in each specific country who speaks Spanish, is also a lot of culture in their language. So I know in Colombia we use a lot of words that people don't use in Ecuador or in Mexico, but now with all social media and all that, you can see all those words like kind of, yeah, mixing up. I know like my brother and some people in my country is still they are already using words in like from Mexico that we never used before, but just because of social media, we're starting using those more commonly in our conversations. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're going to expand our language horizons, and it's just one language. It's Spanish, and you can understand most of it in just like a little things that you can fix and improve in the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So well, Annie, I really appreciate your time. This has been a great conversation. Um I want to close today's episode with an invitation to our listeners. We want to invite them to take action. So what would you invite our audience to do as a challenge for the next couple of weeks?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful to have this conversation. And I think the challenge that I would give the listeners is to think about the language that they're trying to learn, or maybe that they know, but that they want to practice, and make sure that they take time every single day to speak that language. It's great to use an app. It's great to watch a show, listen to music. It's great to read a book in the language that you're learning. And I think all of those things are important and we should make time for all of them. But I also think if we want to learn to speak a language, we need to speak the language. And so my challenge would be to take at least 5 minutes every single day to speak the language. And that could be in the mirror to yourself. It could be on the
Mhm.
phone with a friend. It could be outside talking to the trees, however you want it
Yeah.
to be. But if you want to learn to speak a language, even if you feel nervous about it or a little bit uncomfortable, you need to speak the language. And we need to remember for all of us that making mistakes is part of this language learning process. And we're going to improve as speakers as we make those mistakes and as we notice the mistakes that we're making. When we say things out loud and hear them and realize that that doesn't sound right, it's going to allow us to recognize that something's wrong there and that we need to fix it. And maybe we'll know how to fix it in the moment, or maybe we'll need to look it up, and that's okay. But
Mhm.
I think my challenge is a simple one, but just finding or making 5 minutes a day, every day, to speak the language that you want to learn. And hold yourself accountable to that. Maybe find a friend that you do it with or a friend that you check in with, and just really trust yourself to use the language that you want to know how to use.
That's a great advice and a great challenge. Thank you for sharing that. Actually, one of my greatest friendships come from trees because I speak a lot on my way home or my way to the work. I usually when I was learning English, I talk a lot by myself, but that helped me and get me here. Now I can speak in English. Still learning, but it's a whole process. So, well, Andy, thank you very much again for your time. I really appreciate your insights. And well, I hope to have you here again in the future, maybe to talk a little bit more about languages.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for listening this episode of the Fluency Project. I wish we helped you find your way to learn a new language and that you can use all these tools to help you in the process. Before you go, don't forget about three things. First,